And I had been watching back in the early 2000s, some shifts started occurring from coming out of the drug game, what was on the street in terms of how cartels were moving. And of course, the black gangs were basically getting pushed out of that business into pimping and sex trafficking. And I started looking at that. And I had been exposed to some of that back in Las Vegas years ago. And that's how Daughters Lives Matter ended up really paying attention to what was going on with father-daughter relationships.
No, that's outstanding, man, and it's very important, and I'm glad that you were motivated or had the insight to think about that, because oftentimes, it is focused on the male aspect, but focusing on that father-daughter relationship is important. And going back to your previous point, when the male was absent or forced out of the home, that father-daughter relationship suffered. And the result of what we were left with in terms of leaderless males trying to raise themselves, those became the new or the refashioned role models that were incomplete because they didn't have the father component. And that just makes an atmosphere ripe for abuse and mistreatment from a lack of understanding and knowledge, but also from a predatory standpoint as well.
Well, let me tell you, Doctor, the environment was perfect. How this got set up was absolutely phenomenal. Fathers being discouraged of participating and providing for their family. The risk of trying to do that by getting into the drug game, making that money, paying for those diapers, trying to put some food in the refrigerator, and then the prison industrial complex of packing prisons with people of color, men of color, particularly African American men and Hispanic men, and then being in an environment where that affirmation of trafficking, of meeting the demand, the sexual appetite and demand for young girls in America with no covering. And so you have no covering on one end, you got supply and demand, and then you've got the broker, the pimp, who's the broker in the game. And so it was about that money, and it was about that money to a point where the affirmation title of the daughter be referring to the pimp as daddy.
Absolutely. How about that?
So now,
talk about it.
You follow me?
Absolutely.
And so the environment was right to fill that daddy role, but doing the wrong thing. But the affirmation, the youth, it was absolutely phenomenal how all these pieces started coming together. And I was like, we got a problem. We got a huge problem because we've normalized for a girl to call a pimp daddy.
On that note, we really have to let that sink in and let our listeners really hear that and let that sink in. You're listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. You can find us on all social media platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Breaker, Podbean, etc. You can find our guest, Mr. Terry Boykins, at streetpositive.com. Check out the website, daughterlivesmatter.com. We're going to take a quick break for our sponsors, and we'll be back with more and to talk about some of the things that are being implemented as solutions. We'll be right back.
You've been listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z and where we'd like to hear from you. If you have an idea for a show, you want to hear a topic discussed, or you'd like to be a guest on the show, feel free to email us at letschewthegum@gmail.com or at protocol@gmail.com. Unfortunately, due to some unforeseen circumstances, we're going to have this show continue in a part 2 that we will air very shortly. Please come back to join this conversation, this most important conversation with my special guest, Terry Boykins of Street Positive. And remember, we always have